that I was a major and the guy that I'm working with was a sergeant, it doesn't matter. We're all wearing collared shirts and calling each other Steve and Al. So yeah, it was really cool just to kind of, for those portions of the day and for that 3 months, just kind of throw off the yoke, like never put on a uniform unless I had to do something on base, and just kind of be regular Joe at the company was really pretty cool.
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is powered by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Al Bellamy. Al is a data analyst who recently retired from the Marine Corps. He just started working as a senior marketing intelligence analyst at Analect, a marketing and analytics advertising agency based in New York. Until recently, he was the social media manager for the How to Get an Analytics Job podcast. He lives in North Carolina with his wife and 3 sons, and he loves to write and talk about analytics, veteran transition, networking, and personal branding. In this episode, we go deep into the lessons that Al learned from the military that he can translate now into the data domain. We also talk about his experience breaking into the field as an intern for the first time in his 40s. I hope you enjoy the episode. I know I enjoyed talking to Al. Al, thank you so much for joining me on the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast today. This is long overdue. We've obviously talked quite a bit on LinkedIn. We've had some intro calls, and I'm really happy to bring you in because you have such a unique story, one that I have not heard about, someone who has had a full military career and is now transitioning into data science. I think there's so many things that people can learn, whether they are, have a background in the military or they're just interested in breaking into data science after already having had a career in a specific domain. So again, thank you for coming in, and how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I just like to point out that the meeting is long overdue because it totally slipped my mind, and I feel like a complete jerk about that. We need someone else to remind, or at least to remind me. And I was like, oh crap, was that on me? Like I was supposed to answer back. And so anyway, you were very gracious about it.
No, it's my responsibility to follow up too. I've been traveling a little bit, and it just so happened that everything came full circle, and we're here today. And again, I couldn't be happier. I apologize about my appearance. It looks like sometimes you train the models, and sometimes the models train you, Al.
Yeah.
Okay, I got a little Brazilian jiu-jitsu, an elbow or a foot or something. I have no clue.
That's more than I'm doing.
Excellent. Well, so how I always like to start these episodes is to help get everyone acquainted with you, is to hear first a little bit about how you initially got interested in data. Was there something that happened to you? You saw a dashboard and it sparked this interest, or was it a slow progression over time?
Yeah, definitely I wouldn't even call it a slow progression. I mean, it's just kind of always been a part of my life. Even as a kid, I was always focused on military things, but it was always about like guns and numbers. And so it's like I would go to the museum and I would see like a model of a B-17, and I had to sit there and say, okay, well, it's got 14 machine guns on it, which is more than the B-24 and same thing, like you see a picture or you see a model of a battleship, like how many guns do they have? How big are they? And so, yeah, my mind always went to those two things. I was military obsessed, and I was numbers obsessed. And the two eventually came together. Well, it wasn't a perfectly seamless transition, but yeah, I was never, as a kid, I was never, unlike my host here, I was never good at sports. I was okay at cross country, but anything involving me hitting a ball or two people contacting each other, I was terrible at it. But I did always love sports statistics. So I was the guy that would like memorize the back of the baseball card and all that sort of thing. So as a kid, numbers just captivated me. I would go to baseball games and keep score. I was like literally the only person at the Cleveland Indians game keeping score of the Tribe getting their butts whooped. So that's kind of always been with me. And I just know that it evolved into analytics when my first failed attempt at college, I was at Ohio U right after high school. And it didn't last, but one of the classes that really resonated with me was product and operations management. And I just remember that it was, much like being the only kid keeping score at the Indians game, I was the only student in the class that actually enjoyed the class. Everybody else was in there just kind of biding their time, trying to get out. And at the time, it wasn't something that, like, you couldn't major in that. I think I could have taken like one more class in that field, but of course, that's now data analytics and data science. And I just remember being fascinated by it, and I wasn't using Excel spreadsheets or any kind of, fancy platforms now. Tom Ives and I probably were the only ones sitting there like hand jamming, our own spreadsheets in pencil on lined paper. But that was, just doing like optimizing stuff on the back of a napkin. And I was just enthralled, just the problem solving and the fact that, there's one right answer and you can find it. You just have to figure out how to find it. So it was beyond math in that you had to figure out how to get the answer. And it wasn't just following a series of steps. The steps are up to you. So that to me was just entrancing. But like I said, wasn't enough to keep me at Ohio U and graduating. One thing led to another, some personal life issues, and I wound up enlisting in the Marine Corps. So that was kind of a hard left face into a whole different life. But a recruiter steered me into logistics. And so in logistics, I was doing a job called maintenance management, which, military equipment, we ride it so hard and break it so often that you need whole specialists just figuring out how to maintain it and schedule preventive maintenance and plan corrective maintenance. And it involved a lot of reports and kind of this archaic code that we used to use, which kind of brings us full circle. Little did I know, 20 years later, I would be trying to learn how to code in other languages. So I did that for a while. I eventually, I was actually going to get out of the Marine Corps. 9/11 happened, and I stayed in the Marine Corps, and then eventually became an officer. So I decided to make it a career. And then a couple other jobs here and there. I was doing logistics and supply chain things, and so it just kept coming back to making spreadsheets and optimizing things and trying to figure out the best way to provide for units. I wound up for one of my last jobs at Quantico at Headquarters Marine Corps, and that's where you're moving people around the globe and from one unit to another, trying to figure out how to bring them into the Marine Corps, get them out seamlessly if they choose to. And so yeah, it was a lot more numbers on spreadsheets. And at that time, I managed to get into a master's program at Naval Postgrad, which was in analytics. And at that time, I had no idea how that would translate. At the time, I had buddies that had studied ops research, and it sounded interesting, and it sounded like the things that I had liked in school, and then the parts that I'd liked when I eventually finished my bachelor's degree in economics. And so that was like, well, I like studying this, and it'll translate into some good jobs within the Marine Corps. And so I finished that master's degree, and then a couple of years later, it just came to pass that it was time for me to retire. And so at that point, I had to take this military-oriented analytics degree and figure out what I could do with it. And I like to joke, but it's no joke. I mean, it's legit that I was literally, about a year ago at this time, I was literally Googling what is data science, and just trying to figure out, okay, what is this thing that I've been interested in all this time that I now have a master's degree in? How does this apply on the non-uniform side? So, and I think that brought me to where I was starting to look at, well, who can I learn from? And that, caused me to cross paths with you, with John David Arianson, with Alex Freeberg, and kind of all the thought leaders on YouTube and LinkedIn and podcast space, Harpreet Sahota. And because the only time I had to spare at the job I was doing was driving to and from work. So my learning had to be on podcasts and YouTube. So yeah.
Wow, I love that. There is so much to take away from from your experience there. The one major thing that I took away very early on, though, is your two sons. They must have gotten all their athletic ability from their mother, because I hear they're pretty good baseball players in their own right.
They are. I have three sons, and my youngest son is never took to sports, but he's a great singer, and they haven't done plays in a while, but he used to enjoy doing that, which is more in line with what I did in high school. So yeah, he's the one that takes after me. The two older ones, yeah, their mother was a swimmer in high school, but yeah, I think I had athletic talent. I just moved around so much, I never got to develop it.
I'm giving you a hard time. It's
Yeah.
payback for all the Alex the analyst spicing up our beef, you know.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I had to move on too. Now Luke Bruce is roped into the beef. So yeah,
Oh,
I'm
he
just
is.
spreading the haterade around all over YouTube.
Oh, I love it. I love little things that make the community kind of more fun, and some playful banter is always welcomed.
Yeah.
I think I really want to dive a bit more into your military experience and learn what the biggest or some of the biggest takeaways from that experience was for you. When we think of when I think of the military, I think a lot of structure. I think a lot of like a lot of planning. um what else can someone take away from a career in the military? What else do you learn or do you experience that you think has shaped who you are?
Yeah, I think I didn't really have a term for it or kind of a good catchphrase until a few months ago. A mentor of mine recommended extreme ownership, which I think you've
Jocko Willenick, yeah.
yeah, you read that one too. And yeah, just put a name on that thing that veterans have that not as many non-veterans have or get taught, unless strangely enough that they're involved in organized sports, and then that still encourages some of it. But yeah, I think just the extreme ownership, the knowledge that if somebody gives you a job, you own it, hook, line, and sinker, and that you're they have the saying with commanders in the military, you're responsible for everything that happens or fails to happen with your unit, regardless of how badly a subordinate may screw up, or regardless of how stupid the commander may be. And conversely, if subordinates are geniuses and they make them look fantastic, or her. So you're responsible for everything that goes on within your unit. And I think I was an artillery battery commander, and I took 134 Marines on a deployment. It was not a combat deployment, but we're out there training out in Korea and in Thailand and in Japan. And it's just when you're responsible for humans and their behavior 24 hours a day for a year, I mean that just opens your eyes to a level of responsibility that I don't think exists elsewhere. And yeah, and I know I have a lot of peers that did lead Marines in combat, and that's even when you're talking about being responsible for bringing them home alive and accomplishing a combat mission, that's a whole nother level that I didn't have to experience. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is just that feeling of responsibility and understanding the difference between delegation. You can delegate authority, but you can never delegate responsibility. And so if you're in charge of a job and you have subordinates or team members that are working with you, you hand them job A, B, and C. Job A and B go fine. Job C fails. All three of those are on you as a leader. I see just my wife's interactions. She's never been in the military, but just her interactions with bosses that she's had and different workplaces, and you can spot people. It's like you don't understand what accountability means in this or that workplace. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest one.
That's something that I think everyone looks for in any employee, whether it's data science, whether it's any other domain. I read something a while ago. Essentially, a great leader takes all the responsibility but none of the credit, right? So that essentially means if something goes bad, you're taking responsibility for it. If things go well, you're giving the people who are on your team the credit. And to me, I think that there's especially in domains that are technical like this, where it's very easy to blame your code or to blame someone else, or there's a lot of things that could go wrong. Just saying, hey, like owning up to things or saying that you could do better is not something that ever looks bad, right?
Yeah.
It might feel bad to say that you messed up, but if other people know that, okay, Ken is going to take responsibility for everything that he does, whether it's, whether it's a video, let's say I make a mistake in a video and I say something that's incorrect. Like if I take responsibility for that and I say, hey, I made this mistake, that looks a lot better than me trying to cover it up or do something along those lines or blame it on something else, right? Like if you're trying to tune in on respect and something that builds a successful team or organization, I think that what you've just described is paramount.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, it's tough. It's tough to find these days. It's something that's been lost in a society where we don't have big families anymore. That it used to be in a family, if there were 6, 7, 8 kids, the older ones had to show leadership, and there was some sort of training of subordinate leaders. Most families now have 1 or 2 kids, so there's none of the kids is leading anybody else in the family. So they don't get trained on that at home. So where else do you find that? Really, nowadays you find it probably in the military and in team sports, where you're expected to be a leader at a subordinate level at a young age. Maybe in the scouts a little bit, but yeah, it's few and far between the people that understand that kind of and have it drilled into them at a basic level.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there are other more unorthodox places. Like I think in, for example, theater, there's a lot of opportunity. You have to collaborate with other people, right? If something goes wrong, I would imagine there is some ownership or whatever it might be associated with that. I think that there's a big common thread, and that socializing with people, as much as it might suck sometimes, can be really important, because you
Yeah.
do develop these skills, right? If you're always by yourself, I see this with a lot of golfers, unfortunately, where it's an individual sport. It's really easy to blame everything else but except yourself, right?
Yeah.
And when you're around a lot of people that won't take that from you, won't take having the blame put on them, it kind of rights your ship a little bit, and it gets you acclimated to working with other people. And I will say, I think that that's something that bites a lot of individuals once they get into the job market or once they're in their first role, is that they don't know how to work on a team at all, because the pursuit of education and analytics and data science or even software engineering is largely individualistic.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's something that's subject to change, but I think us talking about it and spreading awareness of it is also really important.
Yeah, I mean, there are programs out there, I think, that are still stressing team project aspect, but I think even in those places, like from what I've seen, when they say, "Hey, this is going to be a team project," the result is a collective groan, because I think everybody immediately starts thinking of like, "Well, I don't want to work with that guy." So yeah, it's tough.
Very tough. Well, talking about, I guess, a collective project or people working together, something you did incredibly well, I think, was networking and finding opportunities to meet people within this space that could help you to understand this domain and to potentially advance your career. I mean, I don't think any of this was done with the intention of just advancing your career. You seem to really enjoy engaging with this community, and you provide a ton of value. But I'm interested to hear more about that experience for you. You said that a lot of the places that you listen to information was on whether it's YouTube or podcasts, but how do you get the initiative? How do you approach meeting people in the content space or talking to these people on LinkedIn? What was your strategy, or what did you learn from that?
Yeah, I think I mean, most of the people that I approached are just approachable. And there are definitely, I won't name names, but there are definitely data scientists out there, thought leaders on LinkedIn that aren't approachable. And
Kenji. Just kidding.
not at all. No, you responded immediately when I sent you a LinkedIn request, and actually I was kind of stunned that I think in like one weekend it was the greatest coup. I think I got you and Kate Strachny to accept my connection request. I was blown away. But yeah, there are people with like far more followers than even such a luminary as yourself. That yeah, it's just they're busy and it's not not receptive to engagement, to connection requests. It's fine. It's not for everybody. But yeah, I just think I gravitated towards the people that seemed approachable and that seemed connected with their fans. I think it probably helped that a year ago you and Alex didn't have near as many followers and subscribers as you do now. You didn't have the podcast yet, so I think you might have been a little less busy. But yeah, it's just the people that seemed friendly. And then of course, when I started approaching John David, it was like, okay, he's got a YouTube channel. It's got followers, but it wasn't in like the stratosphere of 100,000 subscribers or 200,000, whatever the kind of high level is now. And I started listening. It was like, this is exactly, things called How to Get an Analytics Job. So, what could be more perfect? I'm pretty sure that was like the first hit when I searched for either that exact term or something very like it. And so I started listening to it. It's like, oh, well, this guy's right up the road in Greensboro. It's not a stone's throw away, but we're in the same state. That's pretty cool. And yeah, just everything about him was approachable. Everything you guys, when I think I just stumbled upon, it makes sense when you talk about it now, but I think I didn't even know there were like comments on YouTube channels that the authors would respond to. The only thing I'd ever seen of like comments on YouTube was like trolls being jerks to each other or saying inappropriate stuff. But I think when I started looking at your YouTube channels and realizing that you and Alex and John David actually respond to the followers and engage on an intellectual level for the most part, then that was kind of my whammy. It's like this is, and I recommend to people now that I actually talk to people about building a network. It's like, hey, if you're going to go for someone that's an influencer, go to where they live. And so whatever platform you care most about, which for all three of you guys was and still is YouTube, don't start trying to strike up a conversation with you guys on LinkedIn. Alex is on LinkedIn like once a week. Go to YouTube, say something intelligent about the content you just put out, because clearly that's what you guys care about. And that's where you put the majority of your energy. So I think that I just stumbled upon that little nugget, but that's something that and it's kind of organic to the data community. I did a lot of LinkedIn webinars and talking about engagement, building a network, but none of it was like, go find thought leaders. It was all kind of build kind of friends and peers and immediate kind of advanced networks of hiring managers to go get a job. So I kind of took the initiative to engage with people that were, not only succeeding in the field, but were out there producing content. And that's when I just figured out on my own. You love YouTube, I'm gonna talk to you on YouTube. And that kind of seemed to work for everyone. And then, and Kate obviously does more on LinkedIn, so I talked to her on LinkedIn.
That to me, there were two really unbelievable insights in there that seem really simple, but they just aren't. They're not things that people really touch on. The first one that you described is that like your journey met John David's at around the right time, right? Where like, we were both growing. I probably had more time to dedicate to individual conversations, those types of things. And it made perfect sense, right? I still try to communicate with everyone, but admittedly, like on LinkedIn, my inbox is shot. Like there's so many messages that I don't even want to look at it. I'm kind of scared to look at it.
I
probably
mean,
do it one
mine's
day,
getting
but
ugly, so I can only imagine what yours look like.
um, but there's plenty of other people that are on their ascent, that are trying to grow their presence, or they have more time or whatever it is. And if you're looking for like individual mentorship, if you're looking for a more hands-on person to work with, by all means, reach out to them. Like when they're at the same, like they're just that little bit amount further ahead of you,
Yeah.
where you can learn from. Like your needs match their ability to give, right?
Yeah.
Whereas at a certain point, like unfortunately, I can't be as hands-on with people as I would like to, right? I try to make good content. I try to answer all the comments on YouTube. But if I was to do more beyond that with the podcast and these other things, I just like wouldn't be able to manage it. And unfortunately, like that's the trade-off that I've had to choose and decide to make. And I'm not like unreasonably upset about it, right? It means good things. It means things are growing on my end,
Yeah.
but it also means that there are opportunities for other people to grow. Like in this community, I love that there are other creators, that there are other people giving advice, that there are other people sharing their experiences, because one, that like helps check me, but it also means that other people who are trying to learn, their needs can be met in a different way than what I can provide. And
Yeah.
I don't want to shortchange anyone out there. The second thing about meeting people on their home court is like exactly what I recommend. That I love that, because I try to be vocal. I say I'm going to respond to all the YouTube comments. If you want to talk to me there, right? I probably say it in about a quarter of the content that I produce. That means on average, if someone listens to 4 episodes of something, they'll probably hear me say that, right?
Yeah.
The idea of reaching out to me on Instagram or Twitter, which I don't check, on LinkedIn, even, where I just described how crazy my mailbox is, like, go to where I live. I'm going to be there. I spend the most time there. If you want to get my attention, without a doubt, that is the best place to go.
Yeah.
And I think that doesn't take that much research to figure out where someone lives, and it's worth it every time, because your odds of connecting with them go up probably tenfold.
Yeah. And it's not it seems a bit crass to call it a power dynamic, but it's, if at the time I had, 200 connections in my network, and you had, whatever it was, 50,000 YouTube subscribers, I need to come to you. And that's another thing that I've kind of tried to maintain is, an air of humility. And I know that, you definitely have that. You're not, you don't kind of lord it over anybody, but, the time is what it is. And so that's why I didn't mean to talk shit about it. I'm not naming any names, but I don't want to talk trash about anybody that, if you have 100,000 LinkedIn followers, you have to budget your time very wisely as to how much you devote to that. And so, yeah, once you get to the point where you realize there's only 24 hours in the day, and I only have so much time per day, per week to spend on engagement with people, especially when, I'm no longer in the business of trying to find a job. So it's, those exchanges are a little more one way than they used to be. Yeah, it's like, all right, I've got an hour here, I've got an hour there. Other than that, I can't afford the time to respond to every message like I used to. So yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that the interpersonal dynamic, like, we could spend an entire episode talking about the, like, oh, like, what is social proof? How does that work in
Yeah,
terms
and
of,
bore everyone to
yeah,
death. Yeah,
exactly.
we'd be
Well,
entertained.
maybe for a future episode. I'm
Yeah.
sure we would absolutely love that that conversation. But moving forward, we talked about growing the network, and obviously that played a role in setting up a brand, also potentially in employment opportunities. I would like to hear about your experience landing your internship and then eventually your role. What that was like. I believe there was an organization that you worked with as well. I think it was called Hiring Our Heroes, and I'd love to hear about that initiative. That sounds really cool to me. This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP. HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z4 workstation. I really love that the Z line can come standard with Linux, and they also can be configured with the data science software stack. With the software stack, you can get right into the work of doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show.
Yeah, so I definitely took the inside track to the Google internship. I've heard about the process of non-military getting a Google internship, and it sounds horrible. And I'm really glad I didn't have to do that. Yeah, so there's a process. There's a program for transitioning military that's called SkillBridge, and it's basically an internship program. And really, you can get an internship doing just about anything you want, as long as it's legitimate. I mean, they don't want the taxpayers paying people to go sit on their couch. So, but it's during your military contracts, assuming that your command can spare you. I mean, you can't, they don't cut people loose from SkillBridge if they're off, shooting it up in Iraq. But if your command can spare you for the last few months of your contract, and you're willing to sacrifice a fair bit of your transition time and planning ability, which is kind of a dirty secret, then you can go pursue one of these opportunities. And there are various tiers for it. There's a lot of it. Obviously, the military is kind of a bottom-heavy organization. It's a pyramidal structure. So the majority of people transitioning out of the military are four-year enlisted service members. And so most of them have a high school education. Maybe if they've, like me, they dropped out and enlisted, or if they've worked on it while they were in. But it's mostly people ending their four-year contracts. The model provides for 75% of them to get out, and then 25% move up and become leadership. And you take up to 3 months, I think, of the end of your contract, and you go into one of any number of different programs. The one that I did was called Hiring Our Heroes. It's specifically for people with a college degree, and it's called a corporate fellowship program. The funny thing is, I did 22 years in the Marine Corps before I ever heard of the program. It's new-ish, but it's not a year old new. And there was one lieutenant who just happened to serve in my unit for a few months that was putting in for this program. And once I heard about it, I had to actually sign off on this paperwork. And as soon as I looked at this paperwork, I said, "What is this thing?" And just had him sit down and give me the talk on exactly what the program was. And asked a couple of friends who had just retired or gotten out of the Marine Corps, and they said, "It's a fantastic program. Wish I'd known about it and taken advantage of it." So I said, "All right, that's enough endorsements for me." So yeah, put in for it. I was lucky enough. I don't know how lucky I was. I actually got kind of burned to the ground in a job where I spent about a year and a half, and honestly, for mental health purposes, nobody should have to do that job for more than maybe a year. So I had rode well and lived, and my command said, "You may go now," a little early. So yes, I was given permission to go to the SkillBridge program. And then when the program that I put in for, they take you and they give you, first of all, they give you training on how to interview, which is fantastic. They help you write your resume. There's tons of programs out there for service members to help them do that, because we just suck at it. Like, nobody ever teaches us how to do it. So all of that training was wonderful. And then the program actually puts you through a series of interviews after they do a skill assessment on you, and then they have an algorithm that matches you with certain companies that are looking for someone with your skills. So all the interviews I did were data analytics, data science interviews. None of them were technical, unfortunately. I still have not done an actual technical interview, but they were all kind of asking those questions leading into an analytics job. And some really big name companies, I was restricted a little because I was only going to do remote. I wasn't going to leave the coastal Carolina area. So there's not a ton of tech industry here, at least not yet. And so there were certainly some good jobs that I couldn't accept, or good internships I couldn't accept, because I wasn't going to relocate. But yeah, then the sorting hat matched me with Google. I was happy with that. The one sticky wicket was I had been talking to Analect, for some time, and it sounded like a very good opportunity with them too. So I wound up going with Google for the internship, and then as luck would have it, Intellect made a good enough impression that I chose to work with them after I got out. So.
That's incredible. What is it like going essentially from retirement to internship, like starting the cycle almost completely over again, sort of bottom of the totem pole? Um, I have to imagine if that were me, I would feel, maybe because I'm like a little bit messed up in the head, I would probably love that. Like one of the reasons I've loved I mentioned the jujitsu training. I've loved that is that I'm like a white belt, right? I've come in, there's so much ground in front of me to learn. Like I'm just gobbling up all the information. Like when is the last time I looked at something and I felt like there is so much room for me to grow? I can't remember the last time it's felt like that. But
Yeah.
what was your experience like?
I mean, did you like RPGs?
Like role playing games? Yeah,
Yeah.
enjoy them.
So I don't play video games anymore because I find it's obsessive for me. But yeah, I used to love Final Fantasy, like the first couple when they came out on the Nintendo, and then I never had a Super Nintendo, but the first handful, and then the first couple that were on the PlayStation. Then after that, I kind of quit playing video games. But the most fun thing for me was when you would get all the way through the game and you would build up all these skills and all this gear and magic spells, and your guys would level up, and sometimes they'd look more bulked up at the end of the game. But the most fun was then you beat the game and you get to start over, and you're at level 1 and you're fighting with like a little knife, and you're duking it out with like goblins or something, whereas you were just fighting like a nuclear warhead wielding monster. That to me, that's the attraction there. It's like, oh, you mean I only get to concentrate on one thing? I just have to do this, lead hand punch over and over again until I'm amazing at it. And you don't expect me to do 50 things all at once. There's beauty in that simplicity. And I think that's the attractiveness. Yeah, so I loved it. It actually wound up being a bit overwhelming at a point. Towards the end, I caught COVID and I had like the brain fog was killing me, but it wound up being kind of difficult just because we had a project, we had all of the meetings and sort of networking and kind of figuring out the googliness of it all. And then they wanted you to do the data analytics course, which I was doing anyway. But then you also have to transition out of the military after 23 plus years. And that involves a lot of stuff, just a ton of paperwork and medical appointments and all this stuff. So it wound up being a bit of a juggling act. But for me, the going back to square one on a job where you just show up and you're like, I'm the dumb guy. I don't know what to do. What's this acronym mean? Whereas in the Marine Corps, as a field grade officer, you ask somebody what acronym means, they're like, what are you, an idiot? Go look it up. Like, stop wasting my time. But you come in as the intern and you kind of all look the same-ish. Nobody knows that I was a major and the guy that I'm working with was a sergeant. It doesn't matter. We're all wearing collared shirts and calling each other Steve and Al. So yeah, it was really cool just to kind of, for those portions of the day and for that 3 months, just kind of throw off the yoke, like never put on a uniform unless I had to do something on base, and just kind of be regular Joe at the company was really pretty cool.
I absolutely loved your RPG analogy. That's something
I was
that
afraid at first you were going to think I was talking about a rocket propelled grenade, which
no,
those
which
aren't cool.
would make sense based on your interest in military weapons.
Yeah.
But to me, that actually unlocked something in my brain that like a structural concept that I'd never thought of before. And it's this idea that when you're starting out, right, there's so many more possibilities. Like at the beginning of those games, like the skill branches, whatever it is that you could go, they're not limitless, but there's a ton of them, right? But the amount of things that you have to do at the beginning of the game is pretty linear, right? Like your quests are very well lined out. I think that's very similar to data science, any of these paths, right? Is that wow, there's so many different directions I could go. I could go to data engineering, data analytics, machine learning engineer, whatever it is. But the starting path, in theory, it should be pretty straightforward. It's like I'll learn some Python, maybe some statistics. Like I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Yeah.
Once you get later in your career, it's the opposite. You're essentially like narrowing the scope of your total opportunities the more you specialize, but the responsibilities that you have are very vast because you've accumulated this skill. I see this as the same as creating YouTube content. Is when I was first making videos, all I had to do is make videos. I had fun, I got a plan, I got to do whatever, and I
There's
would
no
just go
content
cruise them.
strategy. It's just like, what do I
Yeah,
feel like talking about today?
exactly. And
Yeah.
now I have to plan all the videos, I have to work with sponsors, I have to do speaking, I have to do all these things. And the amount of creativity that I can have in the videos, in theory, limits. Like I'm pretty much can only talk about the data domain, right? Or else people will be like,
Yeah.
what the hell is this guy talking about, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's a false limitation. That's something I sort of impose on myself for the continuity of the business. But it is a little bit like that, and it is unbelievably refreshing, and we should be grateful for those opportunities where we do get to start over. And we can have those when we learn a new Python module or when we do some of these things.
Yeah.
But to say someone at a beginner is at a disadvantage or they're in a bad position, no, it's a different position. There's different strengths and different opportunities and different like drawbacks from being in that position. And I really love how your analogy kind of framed that.
Yeah. I really enjoyed your interview with Vin. It came out a couple of weeks ago. I actually listened to that like twice, start to finish, which I don't think I've ever done that on a podcast before.
Take that,
Um,
John David.
yeah. No, I actually listened to a couple of his start to finish because I had to recap them. But I was actually going to recap the Vin one, but then life happened. But yeah, just got a ton out of that. And I think one of the biggest insights that I don't know if it ever occurred to me, but it should have, because it resonates with that and with the kind of the narrowing of your options at the end of a military career is, the fact that he's only got certain jobs that he can do if he goes to work for a big company. He's only got certain positions he can fill, and then within that company, there's very limited mobility for him. And when he talked about why he left the kind of corporate grind to go start his own company, it's like to give himself more options. Like now he can be the king of the world of of his company, rather than some corporate structure saying the next job up from where you are is this one, but this guy's never going to retire or die, so you're stuck there. Yeah, that kind of opened my eyes and said, oh, it's kind of like the military that way. And yeah, as you go on, your options in a closed set become more and more limited.
Yeah, without a doubt. You sort of there's two ways to look at it. You get stuck in a good way and you get stuck in a bad way, right? The
Yeah.
longer you're there, in a lot of cases, job security goes up, but the amount that you can trudge forward a little bit further goes down. And
Yeah.
so, again, there are these trade-offs, and I think Vin is definitely the type of guy that would not be okay with the not being able to continue to improve and iterate and grow.
Oh, yeah.
That's one of the things I love about him.
Who's putting that dude in a box? Like, I would just duck. Like, I can imagine when he gets mad, that's something to see. I just get that feeling about him.
Yeah, the one day every 30 years.
Yeah, he's so even keeled that you're like, yeah, I bet that dude's got like a boiling cauldron of rage somewhere deep down inside him.
Maybe I've been trying to get him to read me bedtime stories for the last 2 years, but no luck. I'll make sure I link his episode above and below if people want to check that one out. Definitely,
Yeah,
definitely a solid one.
That one is just wall to wall, like earth shattering insights. And God, I love a good metaphor. We just had an extended one for like 10 minutes. So, the fact that he was just all metaphors all the time, I was like, all right, you're speaking my language, man.
It's a great storytelling technique. I'm trying to pick up a little bit of that from him on that front.
Yeah.
I think the last topic I really want to touch on, it has to do with breaking into this field perhaps at a slightly later age. That's something that a
I
lot
like
of
how
people.
delicately you put that. I appreciate
Yeah,
that. Thank you.
I'm not calling you old or anything. I think, uh, but a lot of people, they think that if they're not in their 20s, they've missed a window for breaking into this field, even if they're coming from a related discipline. And that's something, I can tell people that that's not the case as much as I want. But the fact is that I got into this field when I was 26 or 27. Um, I think, you're objectively showing that this can be done, even from a career that is, uh, I would say, non-traditional for breaking into the data science or data analytics career
Yeah,
path.
absolutely.
I would really love your thoughts on that and your experiences with that, and if you felt any perhaps ageism during that process.
Yeah, no, no, not at all. And I try to keep that in perspective just because I know I've got the Marine Corps brand, which is, say what you will about it, but we sell ourselves very well, and that brand is recognized the world over. And so, a lot of that generates interest. And so, whatever aversion people might have to hiring a man in his mid 40s is kind of goes away because they say, okay, he's a Marine officer. He knows all of these things that I can't maybe train a 20 something year old to understand or develop in less than a decade or two. He's got all of these traits already built in. We've just got to soup up the platform knowledge and kind of clickology and muscle memory of the different things that we got to do at work. So no, I didn't. But I think a lot of that is also a mindset. I mean, I think if you get out ahead of it, old guy jokes, that they're well worn. I use them, people use them on me. It's fine. It doesn't bother me. I'm half bald, half bald, half gray. So it's going to come with the territory. But I think if you can just kind of embrace it, and that's just part of your strategy. Like my strategy is not the same as a 21-year-old graduate with a bachelor's degree in data science, nor should it be. I'm not going in there trying to pretend that I'm that guy or gal that's kind of fresh faced and has no life experience. I come in with the skill set and the characteristics that I have and sell those things. And if somebody asks, nobody asked about my age, but if they did, my immediate question would be, well, how much experience do you want? How much confidence do you want? How much, I can stand up and talk on a variety of subjects in front of a room full of people and not freak out. I can give you a PowerPoint presentation without looking at the screen. All of these things that are just kind of baked into the pie of a person that has a couple decades of life experience, you're not going to get with a younger candidate. And oh, by the way, I have a military pension, so I'm probably not grasping for the same kind of salary that a mid 40-year-old data scientist or data analyst is going to be looking for that has 2 decades of experience in the industry. You're not going to pay me the same as a 21-year-old, but you're also not going to pay me quite as much as you would pay Vin or Tom Ives or someone like that if they were hiring. So I think if you just turn the weakness into a strength, just say, hey, here's what I bring to the table. If you're going to concentrate on the gaps that I have, well, maybe I'm just not the guy for you, and I'll go do another interview.
Something that's, I think, a common theme around a lot of the topics in this interview is that almost every situation has strengths and potentially has some drawbacks. And if we're focusing on the opportunities or the good things about each of these situations, I think that's generally a better place to be. We talked about starting over, how there's a lot of opportunities and good things about that, how having experience can have a ton of benefits. And I really think that, that's something that always resonates with me. I'm maybe overly an optimist about things.
Yeah.
And I would like to think that that's worked out pretty well for me so far. Something in the job process, to your point, is like life experience counts, right? It's not just specifically like data related experience. Like life experience is relevant experience. And if you can put someone like yourself in a room with a top executive when maybe a 21-year-old kid would not be comfortable with that. That's something that I think is really valuable and important. I One of the things I'm very fortunate for with my career is, I've had to work and present directly to professional athletes, owners of teams, these types of things at a very young age. How many people can you, within the consulting domain or whatever it is, can you say that have had that type of experience and is comfortable doing that?
Yeah.
Probably not that many, and that's paid tremendous dividends. And like me versus someone else, they might be more technical, but could they go to the CEO and disagree with them when when they're breathing down their neck? That's something that I think is very difficult to purely quantify, but as humans we can easily interpret that. The last thing with someone coming into this career at perhaps a later age is that if they're transitioning and they've already had a career, they're probably pretty serious about it. That's something that is signaling, is that, hey, this person must really be interested, because the opportunity cost for going into this career later is significantly higher. You technically retired, so maybe it wasn't quite as high for you, but someone else who, for example, came from being a lawyer and transitioned in, or from being a professor or some other career, there is a tremendous opportunity cost. And if they're willing to take that on, you can bet they're probably going to take it pretty seriously and adapt and be receptive to criticism or whatever it might be. And that can be a really strong positive as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've had time to think about it. And presumably, like, yeah, if you were 20 years a lawyer and you became a data scientist, I'm guessing you've talked to a lot of data scientists. I'm guessing you've kind of been swimming in those waters, at least on your free time, pretty extensively. You've got a damn good idea that that's what you want to do. Whereas, yeah, 4 years of a bachelor's degree, and if you kind of, if you change your major once or twice, or if you just stick with what you chose initially, come hell or high water, because you just wanted to finish, it's at a certain point that bachelor's degree is on rails, and you don't know, no job experience other than, an internship maybe, or some kind of minimum wage stuff. You're sort of committed to something a bit sight unseen if you go straight into the job market at the end of that degree. And then sometimes it takes people years to figure out, it's like, hey, I really hate this job. And I don't like the field that I studied in college. And I, didn't have the wherewithal or the confidence, whatever, to say anything at the time. And, at some point you feel like, oh, well, I've got to make a living. I've got to, I got bills to pay, and then you got a family. At some point, I think, decades down the road, you kind of set yourself up in a position where it's like, all right, I've got some savings, my bills are paid, maybe my kids are half grown up. And you've had an opportunity to see at least one big thing that you don't want to do for the rest of your life. And then, yeah, if you're doing that massive pivot, you've got enough writing on that decision that unless you're a complete idiot, you've gotten out and experienced that other job, that thing you're pivoting to, and you say, this is something I can accept doing for the rest of my life, or at least in some form. So yeah, I absolutely, having never hired anyone, I don't know, but I would say I'd absolutely give, if anything, I give a premium to someone with more life experience and more professional experience. Just like, hey, you know exactly where you came from and how much you disliked that, or don't want to do that anymore for whatever reason. You're choosing, with the benefit of years or decades of wisdom, to do this job. I trust that far more than I trust someone who, is going on the advice of a college guidance counselor following 4 years after a high school guidance counselor that, may or may not have even, really assessed them well, or figured out what might suit them.
I wonder how many high school or college guidance counselors are aware of data science in this day and age. I had some chats with the guidance counselor at some of my institutions, and we did not agree on things. So, no, I think those are all the questions I have. I really enjoyed this conversation, Al. Tell people how they can learn more about you, and if you have anything exciting coming up in the pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely. So like we talked about, I live on LinkedIn. much to my wife's chagrin sometimes. But yeah, so it's the best way to find me. I do still answer all of my messages. I don't know if that will last forever, but so yeah, I love getting connection requests. I always recommend that everyone send a connection request with a message. Otherwise, you make it a mercenary decision for me whether or not I'm interested in you. If you send me a message and just say, "Hey, I'd love to connect," I pretty much always accept those, unless you're trying to sell me something. Yeah, so I think when this airs, we'll be getting close to Veterans Day, which is November 11th. Hopefully everybody knows that, but I don't judge. On November 11th, I belong to the American Legion, Post 539 in New Bern, North Carolina. And we started a tradition last year, so I think 2 years, this counts as a tradition. We do a hike for veteran suicide. And we have various charities that we give to. Last year, we generated a little money. We've already generated quite a bit, like orders of magnitude more this year. We will have a link for people to donate. Last year, we hiked 22 kilometers from the town of Pollexville, North Carolina, into downtown New Bern, where there's a memorial park. And the significance of 22 is that on average, 22 veterans commit suicide every day. This year, there is still the 22-kilometer option. We have upped the ante, and so starting at 4 in the morning on November 11th, a hardy few of us will be hiking 22 miles from the town of Maysville, North Carolina. If you've never heard of that, don't worry about it. It's a blip on the radar screen. But from Maysville to New Bern. So if you find those on a map, you can verify the math. It's 22 miles. And so it's a great cause. I hike on behalf of 2 Marines that I had the pleasure to work with that for various reasons took their own lives. And so I'll talk about them more, and I'll mention them on LinkedIn as well. But yeah, we'll have something for people if they want to chip in a couple of bucks for the charities we donate to. I'll be sure and list the charities as well. But that is what I'm going to be up to in early November.
Incredible stuff. I will make sure that I link that description in put that link in the description, and I'm gonna be more than happy to share about that. I really enjoyed this interview. Thank you also for your service, and I'm looking forward to the next time that we connect.